This is Euronews Now. I'm Helena Humphrey. Here are your headlines. China launches ballistic missiles as it conducts its largest ever live fire exercises close to Taiwan. Concerns grow over the safety of Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant, with the UN warning that the situation is out of control. And in Iceland, a volcano erupts near the island's main airport for the second time in a year.
Onlookers in Taiwan can only watch with uncertainty as China's military began conducting live drills around the Taiwanese island. It's China's biggest military operation in decades. Over the next 3 days, both air and sea traffic in the area are barred, effectively blockading Taiwan, which Beijing views as a breakaway province. Today, South Asian foreign ministers urged restraint at a summit in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations was quick to warn against provocative action in the region. Also present at the summit was EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, who met with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
This partnership and relationship is also important for the events in the Indo-Pacific, facing the situation in this area, especially with respect to China. There's some news on this front, and we have to talk about it.
China's fury was sparked after US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made an official state visit to Taiwan. Afterwards, she travelled to South Korea, where she is meeting National Assembly Speaker Kim Jin-pyo to discuss security, economic cooperation and climate issues.
Europe's largest nuclear plant is completely out of control. That's the chilling warning from the UN's nuclear chief, who says the situation at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia plant is getting more perilous with each passing day. Russian troops have been occupying the site since it was seized in early March, shortly after the start of their invasion.
For any nuclear facility to operate normally and safely, there are a number of principles and norms that must be observed. And when we look at the situation, the very unique situation we have in Zaporizhzhia, we see that most of them, if not all, are being violated.
Rafael Grossi made an urgent plea to Kyiv and Moscow, asking that experts be allowed to visit the sprawling complex in order to stabilize the situation and avoid a nuclear accident. Elsewhere on the battlefront, Russia's defense ministry claimed its missiles destroyed a depot containing weapons supplied by Poland in Ukraine's Lviv region. On the same day, Ukraine's military issued footage of its forces launching advanced mid-range rocket systems supplied by the U.S. In a new report from rights group Amnesty International, both Kyiv and Moscow were criticized for endangering civilians in the war and violating international humanitarian law. Russia was slammed for its indiscriminate missile strikes, and Ukraine for staging military operations in populated residential areas. On the diplomatic front, Ukraine's President Zelensky met with Estonia's foreign minister in Kyiv, thanking Tallinn for sending much-needed funds to rebuild his country's damaged infrastructure. The U.S. accuses Russia of planning to fabricate evidence about last week's deadly strike on a prison in eastern Ukraine. Intelligence sources, speaking anonymously to the AP, said that Moscow plans to plant evidence to blame Kyiv for last Friday's attack, which killed 53 people in a penal colony in separatist-controlled Olenivka. According to the report, the fake evidence could even include ammunition from HIMARS rocket systems, which the U.S. gave to Ukraine. Both Moscow and Kyiv blame each other for the attack. Ukraine's prosecutor general said the explosion could have been caused by Russian thermobaric weapons. Pointing to satellite images he says showed the facility was torn from the inside. Many of the victims were captured soldiers of the Azov regiment, who are seen as heroes in Ukraine for relentlessly defending the Mariupol steel plant from Russian invaders. Moscow has launched an independent probe into the explosion, and on Wednesday the UN Secretary General announced a fact-finding mission to the site of the attack, noting it was not a criminal investigation.
The UK is set to fall into recession later this year. That's according to the Bank of England, who have also raised interest rates once again in a bid to curb inflation. The rate hike brings borrowing costs to 1.75%, up from 1.25%. Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, blamed the impact of the war in Ukraine as the main cause of the economic pullback.
Now, this rise in energy prices has exacerbated the fall in real incomes and so led to another significant deterioration in the outlook for activity in the UK and in the rest of Europe. The Russian shock is now the largest contributor to UK inflation by some way. There is an economic cost to the war, but I have to be clear, it will not deflect us from setting monetary policy to bring inflation back to the 2% target.
The UK's economy is predicted to shrink in the final 3 months of the year and keep shrinking well into 2023. It would be the longest economic decline since the 2008 financial crisis. Experts are also warning that inflation could soar to over 15% next year.
Supporters of Iraqi cleric Muqtada Sadr are continuing their sit-in for a 5th consecutive day inside Iraq's parliament headquarters in the capital Baghdad. They're protesting a rival bloc's nomination for prime minister. Sadr, whose bloc won the most seats in Iraq's elections last year, has demanded that parliament be dissolved and new elections called, warning protests will continue until demands are met. New clashes erupted between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces in the separatist region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Both sides blame each other for the fighting. Nagorno-Karabakh military officials said 2 of their troops were killed in an Azerbaijani drone attack, while Azerbaijan's defense ministry said 1 of its service members was killed by what it called illegal Armenian armed groups.
A volcano in Iceland has erupted near the capital Reykjavik, pouring out red-hot lava and plumes of smoke into an uninhabited valley after several days of seismic activity. For tourists visiting the volcanic island, the sights at Mount Fagradalsfjall was a dream come true and a sight to behold.
You have the craters open, you have the lava fountain, and then like the flowing lava that is actually also showing the sand and the land in front of itself. So this is really spectacular. I really like it.
It's impressive. It's a bit unreal. The colors are really flashy. It's unreal for me. It's really very beautiful.
Fagradalsfjall is located in the southwest Meredalir Valley and not too far from the country's international airport. For now, there's no potentially dangerous ash plume, but Icelandic experts say it's possible that pollution can be detected due to the gas release.
Drought is threatening this year's vintage in the Gironde around Bordeaux, one of France's most famous wine regions. Weather experts say the country's just had its driest July since 1959. Although vines thrive in an arid climate, there's only so much they can take. France's rural code forbids irrigation from May 1st until harvest. However, some growers have been granted special permission to water their plants this year.
The 2 people who are there each have a hose with a metal tip at the end that allows the water to go straight to the root of the vine, so that this water doesn't scatter anywhere but stays in the heart of the vine, to make the water really go down the trunk to reach the roots directly.
The older vines have deeper roots, so it's the younger ones between 3 to 8 years old that are crying out for water, around 5 litres per vine, and the plants also have their own natural built-in defence mechanisms to cope with the dry conditions and high temperatures.
These yellow leaves show that the vine is defending itself and will stop feeding some of the leaves to withstand this water stress.
And even though some growers have been granted the special permission to irrigate their vines, they're not allowed to use water from the network. It has to come from a well. The problem is they're not as full as they used to be because of a lack of rainfall over the past few seasons. This is a tough year for French winemakers.
In a series of military drills described as unprecedented, China's fired a number of ballistic missiles into the waters surrounding Taiwan. Now, the manoeuvres come in response to the visit of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the self-ruled island, in a move which Beijing views as undermining its one China policy. For more on this, we can bring in Alessio Patalano, now Professor of War and Strategy in East Asia at King's College London. Alessio, I know this is the question that everyone is asking right now, but do you think this is a prelude to an invasion, or perhaps more, an effort to intimidate?
Absolutely not. What we're talking about, as I said, is a core function, or it's a core mission of the PLA, so that the exercises can be sort of like put into place. And let's not forget, it's a very important preliminary point always to make out. This period of the year, it's the summer exercises for the PLA. So the PLA already had a lot of capabilities and material that was designated for the conduct. And this is a core mission. So the fact that these are loud, they are large scale, they are sort of designed to project fear, to strike, fear in the hearts of the Taiwanese, to make this idea that reunification is inevitable, sort of reinforced and underwritten by hard power. So that's no question. But it's a different thing to say that, as opposed to sort of emphasizing that this is a preliminary stages of invasion. What could be if they lasted longer, because some of the splash areas are just outside the main port arteries in Taiwan, create a significant disruption to shipping, and as a result, sort of like disruption to the Taiwanese economy. It depends very much how long they last. But short of that, we're not looking at a situation that in principle would indicate that this is a prelude to an invasion.
So if these are then larger scale military drills, do they tell us anything about the capabilities of the Chinese military?
So these are larger in scale, and the announcement that we've seen over the last 72 hours suggests that we are likely to see over the next few days additional announcements that would tell us more about how far, how big, the actual extent of the scale of the exercise. As we look at them, in particular in light of the missiles that have already been fired, certainly we'll see larger volumes and greater distances that the capabilities, particularly the missile component, will cover. And also the splash areas, they are sort of on the eastern side of Taiwan. They further out at sea. So this really speaks to the capacity of the PLA to simply put more steel in the water at greater distances, and certainly in terms of the capacity to project the firepower, a much greater capacity. That certainly was the case last time we've seen exercise of this kind early in the 2000s.
All right, Alessio Patalano, Professor of War and Strategy in East Asia at King's College London. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. In the UK, the Bank of England has unveiled its biggest interest rate rise in 27 years to stand at 1.75%. The move aims to tackle the soaring cost of living, with inflation expected to hit 13% in October and the economy expected to hit recession in the final quarter. Well, for more on this, we can turn to John Ferguson now, Head of Globalisation at Economist Impact. John, good to have you with us. Do you think that this rate rise from the Bank of England will be sufficient, will do enough?
It's a huge move. It's really, really big news today. And partly, many of us were expecting such a significant rise in interest rates. So to say that it's necessary, it was expected, I think that's part of the story. But I think what took us all by surprise today was the related recession forecast that you alluded to. So even though we may have expected an interest rate increase to deal with inflation because it is high, many of us were sort of blown away by a 5-quarter recession forecast from the Bank of England. So that was really quite a dramatic forecast from the Bank of England today.
Yeah, that's certainly, I think, a lot of people said ouch in response to that news of the recession. Just to be clear then on that, I mean, a recession's one thing, it's never good news, but you alluded to it being quite prolonged, as I understand it.
Absolutely, and that's the shock. And many of us, economists and analysts and government officials and others, are trying to digest the news today. And we're trying to understand if the Bank of England believes in a 5-quarter recession coming up, was it really necessary to have such an increase today? Now, the answer to that dilemma must be, and I think we're hearing more of it as we go throughout the day and hear more from the Bank of England, The answer to that dilemma must be that they believe inflation is persistent and will be persistently high throughout the next 12 to 18 months. And in their analysis, in their forecast today, they have given the view that they think inflation will peak at 13%, as you mentioned, but also remain stubbornly high, almost around double figures for at least another year. So that's the justification. They believe inflation is persistently high and therefore the interest rate increase is necessary despite what they think will be a 5-quarter recession.
So, John, in all of this, we've also heard from the bank that the UK will see living standards fall by 5%. So you mentioned, using the tool of the interest rates. Is there anything else the government could potentially do, any tools that it has in its arsenal to help people who are really going to feel this?
It's a great question, and as I'm sure everyone's aware, there's a leadership contest going on right now for the leader of the Tory party and the country. And this will be down to those two individuals to see what they can come up with. There's not too much more that the Bank of England will do. It's essentially laid out, it's stable today, interest rate increases and possibly more to come as well. But now the attention, as you rightly point to, will turn to the sort of leadership candidates to see what else they can do. There will be a lot of pressure on public budgets, the UK government budget now going forward with the recession coming up. So it's going to be an incredibly difficult challenge for the new leader of the country. But as you rightly mentioned, and we should say again, this recession forecast and the interest rate increases will fall most difficult in all seriousness on those less able to afford households. So this is going to be a very difficult time for everyone in the UK, but particularly those who are less well off.
Yeah, certainly an important point there to really emphasise. John Ferguson, their head of globalisation at Economist Impact, on a day of some stunning economic news for the UK. John, thanks a lot.
Marilyn Monroe remains one of the world's biggest movie stars 60 years after her death. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, the blonde bombshell personified 1950s glamour. She was a model, actress, singer, and forever remembered as a sex symbol of that time. On Hollywood Boulevard, fans queued to see her handprints at the Chinese Theatre.
She's like a very modern and yet a classic beauty that a lot of women, all different races and ethnicities, they really look to Marilyn Monroe as a symbol of beauty.
One of her most witty. Monroe started out modelling for magazines but soon caught the eye of movie producers, starring in hit films such as How to Marry a Millionaire.
The studio promoted image of her being a dumb blonde. She was far from dumb. She was incredibly witty and clever, and she really was a very smart girl, giving, loving, very caring person.
One of the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36.
She made some 30 films, many bona fide cinema classics. The final years of Monroe's life were marred by illness and personal problems. She was married 3 times, but her acting career was more successful than her love life. The circumstances of her death are still subject to much speculation.
Her third husband was playwright Arthur Miller.
Still to this day, she remains a global icon, much imitated by modern-day celebrities.
The Golden Girl received 5,000 fan letters a week.
New releases are still telling her story and packing out theatres. Billionaires are wearing her clothes.
It's the competition that has rocked the golfing world. Now players who have signed with the Saudi-backed Live Golf tournament are suing their former paymasters, the PGA Tour, for suspending them for joining the Breakaway Circuit. The group includes 6-time major champion Phil Mickelson and 10 other golfers. The lawsuit says the PGA Tour threatened to hand them lifetime bans and accuses the organisation of having a monopoly on golf. 3 of the players are seeking a temporary restraining order that would allow them to play in the PGA Tour's upcoming competitions. Live has been a major disruptor in the sport of golf, luring players away from the established tours with larger prize money and lucrative signing bonuses. The head of the PGA Tour, Jay Monahan, says the lawsuit is an attempt by the players who chose to walk away to force their way back into the organisation.
No, I had a really good day. The people here